Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. I'm with David Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We are talking national crazy political news of the day. And we're going to start with the tariffs that President Trump basically ordered on Saturday evening. And the tariffs were going to go into effect on Tuesday, 25% tariffs against a whole bunch of products coming from Canada and 25% on products coming from Mexico and 10% tariffs in products coming from China. China doesn't seem to care that much because those tariffs are in effect, and we will see what type of impact it has on prices here. But the even anticipating the tariffs on Friday, the U.S. stock market went into a tailspin, and then on Monday after he did, it went way down. It's possible that the Trump administration kind of panicked. Not only that, but Mexican and Canadian governments were considering retaliation. Canada was going to oppose its own 25% tariffs, but even more than that, some of the territories up there, they have a bit of freedom up there to be able to do some of their own rules. They were imposing, and for all I know, are still imposing, I haven't checked on it, such things as a ban on alcohol from red states. Red states, of course, being those states that had voted for Trump this last time around. And so that means Jack Daniels, Kentucky bourbon, all of those things were being taken off of the Canadian shelves. And you can actually find YouTube clips of people going through the store and seeing empty parts of the shelves that used to have red state alcoholic products saying buy Canadian with signs there. And the thing we need to discuss is, as most of the listeners have heard by the time this is aired, Trump has put off the tariffs for 30 days with the intention of negotiating with Canada and Mexico border security. It's not entirely clear. He didn't even make it clear exactly what he wanted. But one thing he wanted was more troops at the southern border. I don't believe Canada made a similar promise to stop the fentanyl. Now, as we've discussed on this show, troops on the border probably aren't going to make any difference whatsoever, because possibly as much as 90% of the fentanyl actually crosses at checkpoints, which are not monitored by by anything. The cartels don't load people up with backpacks full of fentanyl and send them swimming through the Rio Grande River. That's not how it's done. In fact, the vast majority of mules are American citizens, many of them white. And they go down there and they come back through. Some of them get caught, some of them don't. It's not like they can stop every single car, right? So this is the issue, and it's not even really clear what they wanted from Canada. But basically, Trudeau, who is still, for the moment, Prime Minister, promised cooperation, whatever that means, to negotiate it. And Mexico promised to send 10,000 troops to the border, which then a lot of Trump supporters were saying that's great, as if there were no Mexican troops there before. There were approximately 30,000, a little more than 30,000 troops that were dedicated to missions, including the border, pertaining to migration. Some of them were sent to the south to prevent migrations coming from Central America. But there were 30,000, and that was negotiated by President Biden in 2021, which raised the level from 5,000. So the experts feel it's real dubious as to whether or not the additional 10,000 troops is going to mean anything whatsoever, but it's something that Trump can say that he accomplished. But even Laura Ingraham, Fox News host, says that she's not sure exactly what they got and feels that he got rolled by both of them. But another theory is that Trump saw the markets tanking, saw the fact that experts were saying the prices were going to go up sharply, saw some of the measures that British Columbia are taking. And the fact of the matter is for the long term, I'm going to turn this over to you in a minute because there's so much to talk to you, but the premier of British Columbia, left-winger, New Democrat, which is basically the Socialist Party of Canada, is premier there. British Columbia is a very progressive place. Most of the voters live in or around Vancouver, BC. But he said we need to not be vulnerable to this. And he's talking about opening up trade with other countries to sell it. Now, real quickly, Canada is one of like about a dozen countries that actually has enough food that it can export food and still have enough to feed its own country. I believe the United States is another one too. I'm not sure of that, but other countries when they're not at war, Ukraine, I think, Portugal, I forget what else, but, so they have a lot of food to sell. And that means, if that's true that only about a dozen have that capacity, that means there's 190 other countries that need food. They don't have to sell to the United States. We're just convenient. We're located here. And they're going to look into opening up those markets. They're encouraging their companies to do that. That could be a permanent detriment to our economy. So many other, this was just a very reckless maneuver according to, of the president. And even if he completely backs down or reaches some kind of agreement and no tariffs are imposed by the end of the 30 days and that passes us, he's already had made, just by threatening it, permanently altered economic relationships between Canada and Mexico and us. There's a lot more to say on this, but I'm going to let you in, Dave.
Yeah, thank you for that setup. I think there's two different things that I think we should focus on. I think we should keep Canada and Mexico separate from China because they're substantially different. So let's start with Canada and Mexico. Trump ran for president based on the escalation of an invasion concept where there was, hordes of migrants coming across the border, fentanyl in our streets, and that we had a national security crisis. That enabled him to use extraordinary sort of the powers of the imperial president. So number one, it got him elected. Most importantly, to be hyperbolic about that issue, outside of the impact that the real immigration problem that you and I have covered, really, the substance of the immigration problem is that we're not processing asylum seekers fast enough. There wasn't an orderly immigration process sufficient to satisfy most, or at least many Americans. Mm-hmm. But an invasion escalation, he came to power now and decided this tariff issue was worth raising. Despite the fact that it doesn't really make sense, how when you impose a 25% tariff on, for say, Canada, that means that American consumers will pay 25% more for every product, and because manufacturers are going to pass that along.
He claims that the countries of origin of the products would pay for it. Didn't provide any mechanism as to that interesting economic theory, but.
Right. Yeah. So Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton, said he described these tariffs, or tariffs in general, actually, as a self-inflicted supply shock. Like that's actually what you're doing. You're making your supply of things more expensive, and you're shocking the consumers. Maybe some producers will move to the United States. Maybe some consumers will change their purchasing habits and buy American-made goods instead. But typically, you're really just telling all of those organizations, all those companies that were part of the long-established NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, and then after that, during the Trump administration, he renegotiated that contract and that agreement. And now he, in the last few weeks, he's been saying that was a terrible deal. It had to be redone. So he was kind of using the bully pulpit, the equivalent of the bully pulpit in international relations, to get a better deal. He wanted some concessions. Well, that as you mentioned, those tariffs that were hyped up on Saturday that impacted the market so severely in anticipation of Monday, by Tuesday, they were suspended. And so what caused that suspension? To the north in Canada, because that's the example we're using right now, Justin Trudeau reiterated to Trump that the statements he made back December 19th, when he said we're going to put forward a $1.3 billion spending plan to have a more secure border, and Canada was going to send 10,000 troops to the border, and they were going to appoint a new fentanyl czar because the people of America, United States, and the people of Canada deserve to have somebody pay attention to fentanyl. Now, this is direct lip service, not necessarily lip service. It's a commitment based on, the anticipation of Trump taking office. But the point is he'd said he was going to do it back in December. Apparently, the conversation he had with Trump allowed Trump to say, this is the concession that we got, that Trudeau fully committed to this, and that's happening. So we can wait 30 days, suspend these tariffs, and then see what happens, see if the actual commitments are carried out. So that's Canada. Something very similar happened in Mexico, where Mexico, like you had said, over the last 6 years ago or so, they had about 10,000 troops committed to the border. Then there was an escalation, but then the troops moved. Well, now Mexico committed to doing that again, to saying, we're going to maintain this 10,000 troop presence here at the border. We're, other agreements based on, you can catch people. If you catch people at the border that are coming from Mexico, they can stay in Mexico. And also, what did the U.S. agree to? The demand was that the U.S. pay closer attention to the gun smuggling, gun trafficking rather, that happens between the United States and Mexico that fuels the cartel violence. So by pointing directly to the cartels, that's an issue. It's a little bit out of scope for what we're talking about today, but there was some anticipation that Trump's administration was going to crack down very hard on these cartels, and this is a mutually beneficial arrangement. But in effect, nothing that wasn't already in place was achieved in these negotiations. So really, the primary twofold. There was the domestic audience here in the United States who saw tough talk lead to the claims that we got tough solutions, and that's a campaign promise made, a campaign promise met. So for Trump's supporters, that they're glad that this happened. Also internationally, if you're going to be this bold and this forceful with your neighbors and your closest allies, I heard somebody say Canada's agreed to send troops to every war that the United States has been in. I think since like World War II at least, but maybe even prior, maybe World War I, maybe way back, maybe all the way back. So it's our closest ally, save for possibly the UK, United Kingdom, England, which is that's our kindred spirits in the world. So because of the global footprint that we've inherited after World War II. So anyway, Mexico and Canada, like nothing much changed. It was more about the display of power.
I want to point out here. There's a graph, a chart that is no longer available. One of the many things that are being taken off, but off of the government websites. But the what is it? The WOLA. I don't know what it stands for, but it's an advocacy group for human rights in the Americas. Has the chart that was last up, and it indicates that as of January of last year, there were about 32,000 troops at the border, of Mexican troops. As of January 2021, there was about 8,000. It got negotiated up to about 27,000 in May of 2021. Again, this is Biden, and it's interesting that that you can't get this chart. Why would this chart be taken down? Because it shows pretty much the obvious. Now, I don't know if the presence at the border or the migration missions decreased since last January. It did take a dip in 2023 to as low as about 23,000. But then it went back up again to almost 35,000 in 2023, the latter part of 2023. This is important because I'm not sure that the 10,000 troops, it'll probably mean that there are 40,000 troops involved. if they're doing that. It's just not going to make any kind of a difference. But the question is yeah, what did they gain? And even a bigger question is, why did he announce these tariffs before he had even coherent demands, right? I mean, this is supposed to be to intimidate the other countries into doing something. And I don't know, maybe this was idea of Trump's having the United States becoming production-wise self-sufficient. It was a really bad theory. I know it is a theory that, that's what we should do on a regular basis because the demands for the border weren't coherent at all. What Sheinbaum and Trudeau offered him was basically a face-saving off-ramp. That's what they gave him.
Yeah.
So he could claim victory, and that's about it. And even some conservative commentators are saying that. Yeah, what did you get? You got nothing. But they're saying, well, maybe it'll come over and maybe we'll have something better by the time we're done negotiating this, and the rest. But, I can't remember the name of the commentator because I've been reading so much about it all weekend and all week. They said that you had conservatives complimenting Trudeau, which is a big deal because they've got an election going. They don't want to be complimenting any liberal candidate, even though he's going to be out of office soon. That is how seriously effed up that this Trump move was. It unified Canada. The New Democrats, I told you, talked about the premier, but there are New Democrat MPs that are just writing fiery speeches, and they haven't stopped even after this agreement. Of whatever it was. So this is, it'll be interesting to see if there's any type of impact with the China is one. It's kind of limited, but it's just, if you're going to threaten somebody, you've got to have demands. You must do this, and this, and you can negotiate off those demands, but you got the person you're threatening or the entity you're threatening has to know what it is you want. But he just wanted to do it. And then I think the administration panicked when they saw what happened with the markets.
So there's a conspiracy theory out there that people knew that signaling there would be tax cuts affected the markets. There's evidence that 100 times more hedge fund bets and derivatives went in to a downward trend in the market over that weekend than typical. So 100-fold increase in bets that it would go down. It goes down. They cash out on Monday. The tariffs are rescinded on Tuesday, and now Trump has a reliable connection to hedge fund people who benefited handsomely. Take that as with a grain of salt because no one really knows about any individual actors. I know we have minimal time left, but I just want to mention China. I think China is important because that 10% threat of a tariff. China has already responded and said, we will carry out our tariffs on February 10th. So we're talking about less than a week away now, on coal, oil, and gas, on agricultural machinery, an antitrust probe against Google as an illegal monopoly, even though they have their own monopolies. So it's really just performative. They put some clothing manufacturers on the list of unreliable entities just to say, hey, we're going to hit that sector too. Brand names of luxury goods, and also export controls on rare metals, which is really the meat and potatoes of why I thought it was important, because we're talking about those rare metals are part of like the battery infrastructure, the power, the transition to electric vehicles. Rare metals are part of that. And so it's a critical core component of all future manufacturing in the near term, medium term, at least. So what Trump said was, I'm going to have a negotiation with Ukraine. And as long as Ukraine's willing to give us their rare metals and can replace what we get from China, United States will promise $300 billion of support for Ukraine against Russia. So it's a little bit of three-dimensional chess here going on. But a lot of it, like I said at the beginning, Labor Secretary Robert Reich says that Trump's techniques are, number one, increasing power by a display of power, meaning you can hand out punishments and you can hand out rewards. Yeah. So this was a display of power, but also unpredictability. Like this was not, it's not in the U.S.'s self-interest to have tariffs, But if we're going to move and say, oh, we're going to have these or we're not going to have these, that Trump believes, and people commenting on Trump and say that that's one of the core elements of his power is that unpredictability. So that's we're going to be reporting on this as it.
We will, and we could go on, but we do have to go to the next segment. Okay, more chaos. I'm going to, Dave, have you explain exactly what Elon and his people did. But they basically broke into the Treasury bank account, and they have done, among other things, they basically frozen U.S. aid. The Democrats were and employees were barred from the USAID office. I'm going to let you talk a little bit about what USAID is, why this is significant. I believe they're estimating that these freezes could cost as many as 10,000 jobs. And then also what did Musk do? And there's a lot of there are a number of lawsuits being filed against the DOJ and in general because he hasn't passed any kind of clearance test to be able to even do this, nor have the people that he has been, of his employees who are, I don't know if they're hacking or just breaking into the records, but there's already a lawsuit about giving them access to private records of individuals across the country. It is complex, but it is hurting a lot of people. Dave?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that happened, and I know they kind of overlap, and there's a degree of confusion that comes from it. But you explicitly, we'll start with the Treasury data. So in effect, when Congress passes a law and then they commit spending, that spending is committed, and then it's the executive branch that through their Office of Congressional Budget, the Office of Management and Budget, then allocates, releases the funds to the particular places where they will be spent. But it's the Treasury Department that technically makes the payments. So there's part of the Treasury Department called the Fiscal Service. And there's one person, really who is credited with having the skill set to manage the United States funds as we go through cycles of where we are bumping up against a debt limit, our debt ceiling. They're able to say the number one goal, the number one thing that people don't want to do is jeopardize the full faith and credit of American commitments through Treasury bonds, Treasury bills, debts, etc. So in addition to paying for things like programs, they also are paying debts, and it's a juggling. It gets shuffled around. Well, what Elon Musk's crew of I think less than half a dozen young genius engineer folks, they went in and they demanded access to the actual payment system, and the people there said no way, and they actually resigned. But they did, they got it. And so what Senator Wyden from Oregon, the way he explained it is, we are fearful that now they can decide on a payment by payment basis what will actually go out the door. And so really it's the executive branch, usurping the power of the purse that typically from a constitutional perspective goes with the Congress gets to decide how the money gets spent. So they now have access to the computer system with every payment, every person who's paid, all that private information.
Let me break in real quickly about the half a dozen people you're talking about. There's been a controversy on Twitter /X because somebody doxed them. Their names were put up, and Elon Musk immediately put up a post that attaches to any of those saying you have committed a crime, which is kind of ironic. But he's also been canceling Twitter accounts that have posted those names. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know that I support posting names because that could get him hurt. There's a lot going on. But on the other hand, there's a lot of hypocrisy, and I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, so this is one of the areas where people are raising red flags about overreach of executive power here. That because it was Elon Musk and because of the people that work for him, if you want to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, he was interviewed and he said he works for me. He comes and checks in with me, and I let him do it. And if at any point Musk doesn't, I don't want Musk to do it, he won't do it. But realistically, we see it. For all practical purposes, it's really Musk's capacity and skill that is the most disruptive force there on the Treasury side. People are very fearful about, and there's a lot of talk about maybe because he doesn't have security clearance and can't get it because of his relationships with China, and also because he has a history of payment systems he and his colleagues created, like PayPal, and are in the business of payment systems, that there's a potential for blockchain to be used and actually circumvent the banking system entirely in future federal payments. So there's a lot of very powerful forces at play that are a little bit outside the reach of most people to really have understanding or concern for. But the takeaway, I think a great place to pivot to here is last summer, Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts said that the country is in the midst of, quote, a second American Revolution, and that this will be bloodless if the left allows it to be. That was, quote, if the left allows it to be. And he was on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, and he said that Republicans are in the process of taking the country back. So it just indicates that there's this premeditated disruptive force, like disruption. Even Elon was wearing a little Greek omega symbol, which in electronic world means resistance. So they feel like they are resisting the establishment on every level.
Ironic because they've become the establishment, but
right.
Anyway.
So if you don't mind, I think we pivot to USAID. So you'd asked me, kind of explain a little bit about that. Similarly, on Saturday, I saw that USAID was the signs were taken down from the front of the building. The group of Musk representatives from the DOGE, the Department of Governmental, what was the E in DOGE?
I forget. It's not even a government department.
Right. Yeah, expenditures or something like that. Yeah. I'm sorry, I've forgotten what that stands for. But the idea is that this private group that works directly under the president in a part-time capacity, they went in and they took over the system. And
what is USAID? It was passed, signed by Johnson into law. Why don't we explain that and why this?
Yeah. So President Kennedy basically declared that the U.S. has an obligation to support poor people and developing countries around the world. The United States has historically benefited massively from global resources. I'm gonna attribute this to Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group. I think he boiled it down really well. So I'm paraphrasing his brief here. The United States has historically benefited massively from the world's global resources, and the people of those countries have not received a significant share of those benefits. We benefited from the entire industrialization the last 170 years, all the carbon that's been committed through that. Europe and the United States benefits from that. But the rest of the world has really constrained options for development due to climate change. So we have this advantage, and we've always had this advantage in the post-World War II environment. And so the charity aspect from JFK, from his vision, and Johnson, like you said, back in the mid to late 60s, feeding the hungry, improving the plight of the impoverished, because it's the right thing to do.
And this was all part of the Alliance in conjunction with the Alliance for Progress, where the Peace Corps was created. It was a whole big program to basically win the hearts and minds of of people. There was an anti-communist component to it, and there was a
Yeah.
bunch of other stuff. But this was to basically lift the then term third world up, basically. Anyway.
Yeah. So the idea is that the United States influence around the world with the military is hard power, that's sticks, and development aid is soft power, that's carrots. And so, our influence around the world as a country, our American values, we benefit from engaging with people around the world, these development programs. And so, it's been I think last year it was one of the highest amounts ever, but around $50 billion a year in total aid. And so this, again, we talked about the soft power that comes from supporting civil society. And so anytime there's like an insurgency, some area where people would benefit from democratization, or when there's famine, people would development from food development. When there's health outbreaks like pandemics, people benefit from health development. So it's a mutually beneficial thing. It's not just charity, which how Marco Rubio framed it. It's also in the United States' self-interest to be engaged with other countries like this and develop these relationships. So this administration decided that, well, because some of those programs fall out of favor based on their DEI sort of phobia. They're transitioning, they're framing this is a deeper concept, but they're framing it, the administration is framing some of these potential changes, not just to USAID, but to across the board, to all federal. That's why they're shutting down government computers and putting in their own crews. And that's why they're asking people to resign across departments, like in the Department of Education, for example. They might be shutting down the Department of Education. But before that, they've gone in and kind of wiped out. They shut down like 6,000 websites and wanted to change all mentions of things related to DEI. So again, this is like an overlapping.
Let's be clear. They're even starting to acknowledge they don't have the ability to officially shut down USAID or officially shut down the Department of Education. They're just basically going to strip them of anything, and let it stand, and maybe have Congress try to pass that. Department of Education was passed under Carter, and it was a bipartisan bill that put it together. There were, I think, about a dozen Republican senators. I don't know how many people in the House, but it was not considered a radical proposal at the time. But of course,
yeah. So two more things about USAID. One is that the plan is to fold it into the U.S. Department of State, with Marco Rubio would then sort of be the head, because even though it's supposed to be independent, it would now be under that aegis, the umbrella. But the U.S. State Department would, by losing all of the staff members of USAID who manage all these grants and programs and have all this, centuries of institutional capacity for the staff, chances are it would be, really it's a way, even if they did ramp up some of these programs again, it'd be a way to cut funding. So by taking over the computers with the top secret information about all of this money and all of the people involved, it's about power. And so the big takeaway here, lastly, about USAID is that countries around the world will start to see the United States as a less reliable partner, because we are walking away from commitments. We're walking away from being that shining beacon on the hill, so to speak. But that creates a power vacuum. And so who's going to fill that? Well, China has this Belt and Road program where they are making investments across the world, and they are making investments particularly in Southeast Asia and in Africa, and they even tried to get some programs going in South America. And to say one thing positive about Rubio's commitment, he did say that the Americas are going to be the refocus. So as they as they retool up programs, they are talking about maybe having a new focus on Latin America, South America, Central America, and so maybe some of those programs will be reinstated. But
basically ceding Africa to China and Russia.
Yes.
I mean, that's a big deal.
It's a very big deal. Yeah. And so like I said, these are bigger issues, and they do overlap. But I think it's important to recognize that when it comes to loss. You said we're talking about thousands of jobs. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars. In the big picture, this is that disruption that Trump has said he wants to do. They have their eye on, people are saying that the Trump tax cut is going to be $4 trillion, about $400 billion a year for the next 10 years if they extend the tax cuts. And they have to get that money from somewhere. So they figure they could get two birds, one stone. Here, one they're saying, hey, there's a culture war going on and we're going to root out these people who have, they're calling it racism to even track race, right? So that they get that lane. They are controlling payments. They're taking over the ability to spend, and also the prioritization. It's easy to badmouth foreign aid and development money when we're not making, both parties have a track record of not making appropriate progress here at home. And talking about real healthcare, real housing, real education problems we have here at home. If either party was leading by example, the maybe American population wouldn't be quite so, American citizens wouldn't be quite so receptive.
For the third segment, we're going to focus on the resistance. The Democratic Party can't do a whole lot. They can do some things. They can slow down appointees. In fact, the administration is already accusing them of slowing down appointees to the State Department. But they don't have a lot of options. They can file lawsuits, but really they've got to build to retake at least the House and, well, if things get really chaotic under Trump, possibly the Senate. I personally think that Senator Tillis, the Republican, is making a big mistake by not resisting Trump in any way whatsoever, because that state is not necessarily going to support him. But we'll see. But certainly they need to retake the House. And they do need to think in terms of 2028 and not making the same mistakes that they make over and over and over again. One of the mistakes that is attributed, and there's all different analysis still as to how Harris lost the election to Trump. And probably a lot of them are true, because when you're talking about 1.5% of the voters, it doesn't take, it can take any single one of a dozen or more causes could have made that difference. But one of the things that people on the left have noticed was that she was going strong, 4 even points ahead in polls, maybe even more, which was the comfort zone for being able to win the Electoral College. And she did well right up until about the debate. And then people are saying she listened to the Clintons, listened to Mark Cuban, listened to possibly James Carville, who regrets it, and basically took away the populist message and just, again, focused on attacking Trump and not presenting a vision. Because why? Because visions are costly, and big donors don't want costly visions. And that has hamstrung the Democratic Party, because anytime a candidate runs with a vision, they shut him down. Both Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are examples. They just absolutely, their donors that just absolutely didn't want them. Well, they did bring in, as vice president, Harris, when she was still listening to more people, Tim Walz, who is possibly the governor with the most progressive agenda implementation in the country. I mean, bar none. And he did it by talking populism and putting together programs that work. And Minnesota is kind of seen, even though the Democrats have lost ground in a few working class districts there, it can be tied to the lack of what I've discussed on the show often, the lack of a class consciousness in the Democratic Party. Very much, at least providing lip service to a lot of other parts of the coalition, but neglecting the working class, which used to be the staple voter for the Democrats. And we've talked about that. Enter Ken Martin, who has won an election by over I can't remember how many votes, about 100 of them. There's a half vote in there somehow. I have no idea how that worked. But it was 134 and a half DNC votes for the Wisconsinite versus 246 and a half. It was Wisconsin, not Minnesota. And he was the leader of the Democratic the Democratic Farmer Labor the Farmer Labor Party. And he's worked in Minnesota too. That's why I said it. Where the DFL has won.
Just to be clear, real quick, Martin was from Minnesota and Wickler was from Wisconsin.
Thank you. Wickler was basically the donor choice, or the consultant choice, and lost, and had the backing, as you noted. Well, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in Minnesota, the DFL has won 25 statewide elections in a row with a populist, working class focused message. And he's in there. He wants to focus on smaller donations, rather than the big time donors, and not to be, at least the lip service he's providing right now is to break free of the so-called donor class, which is basically what has probably been the main cause of Democratic defeats up until now. If they could ditch that and maybe just not let themselves be affected so much by lobbyists, maybe they can get back to some of the basics. The Democratic Party has never been that left-wing a party, but there was a time when they won a lot of elections in what are now regarded as red states with populist working class messages. And we know from a previous discussion that we've had that a lot of people who either voted for Trump or didn't vote at all like progressive policies. We brought up that the minimum wage increase in Missouri passed, overwhelmingly red in terms of Trump, but it couldn't pass in California, right? I mean, it's some very interesting twists. So does the election victory of Martin, does this mean that there's going to be a change, and one that can possibly not only save the party, but turn some of this stuff around? Nation magazine, the oldest magazine in the country, by the way, and is also a very left-wing magazine that has been, I don't even want to call it extremely critical of the Democrats. They basically, they have had a headline that we need to vote for our class enemies at one point. They were, hold your nose and vote Democratic. They were not enthusiastic about it at all. And they have a bunch of criticisms, but they like this choice. They have, John Nichols has basically an editorial comment. New DNC chair Ken Martin is ready to build a bigger, bolder party. John Nichols, if you don't know, is very progressive on the left end of the Democratic Party. You'll see him on television at times. I suggest people check out that article about this. Maybe there's some glimmer of hope here, but he's not going to be in Minnesota. He's going to be in Washington, D.C. And will he be able to do what he did for the Democratic Farm Labor Party in Minnesota?
So thank you for that setup. As always, I did see Ben Wickler, the Wisconsin Democratic Party chair, speak on Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and he did have some insights. One of them, which also was quoted in that Nichols article, which is losing working class voters in 2024 has to be a wake up call for the party.
Should have been a wake up call in 2016, but never mind.
Yeah. And so you and I mean, we did the election coverage. We saw little red arrows in every county, not every, nearly every county in America, which was a shift. We saw youth vote shift to the right. We saw some Black and Latino voters shift to the right. So obviously the party missed the memo and wasn't really speaking to these folks leading up into the 2024 election. Well, Senate Minority Leader Schumer, House Minority Leader Jeffries, former Speaker Pelosi, some Democratic governors like Michigan's Gretchen Whitmer, but also donor class, consultant class, the folks that kind of are known to control the party tightly. They supported Wickler, but like you said, he lost by about 112 votes. Very few other votes went to anybody else. It was really between them. Marianne Williams, I think she got 0 votes. Faz Shakir, the former Bernie campaign manager, also worked with AOC, got like 2 votes. So it wasn't the left. It's not like the left got their candidate. It was a question of, is the institutional choice going to win or not? And many of the people that vote are actually those same institutional voices, but not all of them, as we could see from the outcome. So what did Martin add to this? Well, for one, he was the head of the Association of State Democratic Chairs for a long time. So he has networks, a robust network nationwide, and he really tried to promote a urgently populist message. This is according to John Nichols. I'm quoting that. He said that he promoted bolder stands on things like healthcare, childcare, climate, labor rights. He wanted to forge a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-generational, urban and rural coalition. He wants to separate. He wants to make it clear what Democrats have to offer instead of Republicans on economic issues. So he spoke to, the bulk, the sweet spot of the party that needs economic issue differentiation. Like where do we need to focus some energy on grassroots people? That's really important. So that was a shift. Basically, people were voting against the status quo. Something had to change. So just as a reminder, the former chair of the DNC was Jamie Harrison. I heard Lee Fang talk about this recently, and he writes about it. And he said that, Jamie Harrison was actually a former lobbyist for the defense defense industry and the pharmaceutical industry. So in a sense, the consummate insider. And while he was the party chair in South Carolina, had connection to Senator Clyburn. That was sort of the status quo insider power move. As you remember, the Iowa and the New Hampshire primaries were changed so that South Carolina could be first. So really the power move was a little bit off-putting, I think. People were calling for reform within the party, like a lack of transparency about the budget, a real concern about how much of that money, Kamala Harris raised, I think we said $1.2 billion. Huge sums of that went to high dollar consultants. Those are those same consultants that are actually in the room trying to pull the strings and guide the party. See, Lee Feng's observation was that realistically the party's main purpose to date has been to make sure that they can control the party, and that they were less bold when it came to meeting people where they are. And so, there probably was a lot of soul searching that needs to happen here. But realistically, reorienting the party away from the establishment is what I think grassroots folks really want. So that's devolving money to the states, letting the states kind of figure out what's important to them. Because as you and I have talked about, when it came to the election, general election, we were talking about 7 states, right? Like the DNC wants to win at the national level, and they're going to steer all their resources to those battleground states, which is a dozen at most that are getting money. But in reality, the national party should serve the whole country. So there's a democratization underway. And really, for our purposes, what does that mean? Young people, rural people, going to meet voters where they are on those bread and butter economic issues, like, not to sound redundant, but healthcare, housing, education, not inside baseball stuff. And so you asked, like, what's the hopes and prospects? I think there's hope now with that some degree of control was taken away from the party insiders, but it's a difference of degree from what I'm saying. It's a difference of degree as opposed to a difference of kind.
Yeah, no. And I mean, on the other hand, his speech, his winning appeal to the committee, as stated in this article, he cites the Union song, "Which Side Are You On?" written by Florence Reese about the coal miner strikes in Kentucky in the early 30s. Are we on the side? And he said, are we on the side of the robber baron, the ultra wealthy billionaire, the oil and gas polluter, the union buster, he asked, or are we on the side of the working family, the small business owner, the farmer, the immigrants, the students? Let me tell you, I know which side I'm on. So this is all good rhetoric, but, again, he's got to, it's not enough for him to say it. He's got to try to deliver it, and he's not going to be operating in an organization that's similar to the DFL. But maybe some of these people, maybe even some of these donors are tired of losing elections, right? I mean, they're going to lose a lot under Trump. And so they, when you had even, what's the raging Cajun?
James Carville.
James Carville, saying that Bernie was right. I don't know. Maybe there will be some decentralization of that, and maybe there will be a move away from just the constant fundraising. I mean, the fundraising didn't do any good. She made $1 billion she spent, over $1 billion, and she brought in glitzy stars, had these big events, but we should have learned from Clinton, because that didn't work for her either. She had, instead of Lady Gaga, she had Beyonce and the rest. I mean, or not Beyonce, I forget who was at the Texas one, but they shouldn't have to spend. They should organize people to organize groups. This is what the Democratic Party has done in the past, and it wasn't necessarily left-wing radicals, people like Senator Gephardt and the rest back in the 1980s. That's how they got elected. And so who knows? Maybe it's not a different kind. It'll be a difference of degree. We won't know. But until then, but maybe reality is going to force them. This is how you win. Otherwise, they're just going to keep losing. And identity politics isn't doing it. Attacking Trump isn't doing it. Environmentalism isn't even doing it. They got to have a working class message.
Eeny, meeny, chili beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
Following up on our last segment, the Democratic Party has been slow to process the election of Donald Trump, and all indications are that they are struggling to respond to the pace and severity of the changes that are taking place. For example, Trump supporters are out there, some of them traveling the country, producing a series of videos documenting the so-called invasion at the border as they see it, to get ahead of the backlash they know is coming from those images. They are moving fast to harmonize their message and distribute it through a wide range of independent social media channels, keep their base aligned. Contrast that with the recent DNC election, unfortunately received by their base as a group of insular donors and consultants who are just trying to solidify their control of the party, mostly tone deaf to the changes going on around them. My prediction is that this Trump administration, their strategy of lawless disruption will continue unchecked for the foreseeable future until something drastic happens that causes the Democratic Party to rise to the occasion. And unless a change of heart from a group of GOP senators or representatives emerges, this administration will likely string together a series of significant changes, potentially all the way through the 2026 election cycle, setting the stage for an epic confrontation over the future path of our country.
Right. Well, in 2026, they got to get it done before then. So yeah, they're going to hurry. My prediction, I'll be real quick. I'm going back to the first segment. I believe that the 30 days are going to elapse and there'll be some negotiations. There'll be some meaningless, agreement. Trump will not impose, the tariffs because he knows that that's really bad news, for the economy and he doesn't want to get dragged down by it. But he will claim victory, and Sheinbaum and Trudeau will probably allow him to make that claim without contradicting him so that they can be the adults and avoid the trade war. We'll find out if any of these things come true, but until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.